Hi, SS, can you hear me?
Hi everyone. Good afternoon. We'll just give people another minute to join and then we'll kick things off. Just allow us a minute. Hi folks. Good afternoon. Today we're our apologies. I think we're just setting up some tech. We'll just start in a minute. Aprajita, you're here, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Great. So I think, folks, welcome back to the third session in our series on DPDP and where an AMA on the data protection law, which has recently been enforced. Today we'll focusing on fintechs and the law's impact on financial tech companies and financial services organizations. Again, the idea is for us to have a freewheeling chat on these themes, and we got a lot of questions from all of you in this room on the specific impact, focus more on practical and operational realities of the law. So we're just going to we'll just screen some of the common. We've bunched together a couple of the common themes that have come in, and we'll do this just as a Q&A. Feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat as well, and we'll take them up along the way. Across different themes. But I think for this, and culled out a few key themes and bunched together questions on those. So I think the first one is around DFDP. Again, we'll not really go into the basics of the law. I think everyone's familiar with that by now. And what we'll start with is this construct of data fiduciary and data processors, which we're all familiar with. But how does that interplay with a regulated entity and a tech platform in the DPDP context? We will speak about consent, notice, cross-selling among fintechs, sharing with group companies, and all your queries around that. We'll also specifically talk about sectoral interplay. There are so many aspects and arenas where the RBI might say something different, either stricter or lenient or just inconsistent with what the data law might ask us to do. So how would fintechs reconcile these obligations, and then generally conclude with a more general set of questions on compliance roadmap and priorities. With that, I think we'll throw open the floor as well, and maybe just start with the theme around DF and DP. Sam, if you could move to that slide. So we have a couple of questions on this theme that we've gotten, and I'll start with the first one, which is a prominent one that we hear from a lot of folks, which is on whether lending service providers are data processors or data fiduciaries. Are they joint fiduciaries? Because often customer data is first collected on the tech platform, but how do we really bifurcate this? And I think all of you may be familiar by now with the construct of DF and DP, but just to refresh your memories, a data fiduciary is the entity which is calling the shots, directing the data processing, whereas data processors are only processing data on behalf of the data fiduciary. In the financial tech context, this becomes a little more complex because the RBI already sets out a hierarchy where it says the regulated entity sits at the top. RBI is only concerned with the regulated entity or the bank, NBFC, and the tech service provider sits below the regulated entity from the RBI's lens. A lot of the directions dictate exactly how REs, lenders in particular, can share data with TSPs. While the DPDP Act simply has the construct of fiduciary processor, which is on calling the shots versus processing data on one's behalf. So that really is the first interesting question for us on where do these tech platforms sit? Is it that they are merely processing the data on behalf of a data fiduciary, which is the bank? Can they really be playing these dual roles where they are also a data fiduciary for certain aspects of the data, for certain parts and certain processes? Or is it that they're exclusively data processors? So maybe, Aprajita, any quick initial thoughts on this one, and then I'll also jump in and add to that.
Yeah, so I think the conversation kind of will go into different aspects of DF and DP relationship. But maybe we'll start with an example. Baseline principle is who calls the shots? Supposing there's a super app, which there's a technology service provider. On the landing page, Aprajita enters into T's and C's and privacy policy with the super app. The super app is not a regulated entity, but within the super app, you have multiple regulated and unregulated functions. Unregulated functions could be an e-commerce feature, a chat feature, general advertisements on the page that you can click on and go to third-party service providers and merchants. It also has regulated products and features. It has a PPI that you can open. That PPI is issued by a bank issuer or a non-bank issuer, an RE. It has a loan offered by an NBFC. So let's imagine this ecosystem play in which the first privity or the first contractual relationship that a user has is with a technology service provider. That technology service provider owns the entire platform. Within this platform, the user can take access third party goods and services as well. Some of these third party goods and services are offered by regulated entities. For example, an NBFC offers me a loan, a PPI issuer offers me an e wallet. And to do so, the user has to execute separate T's and C's, privacy policies, of course, and whether it's a loan agreement or for a PPI holders agreement, etc. Now, before the user goes and accesses any of these products, she first has a relationship with the platform, enters into T's and C's with the platform, gives access controls to the platform for, say, location, SMS, phone book gallery, various different mobile phone resources, etc. At this first instance, she has no privity or direct contractual relationship with any other third party service provider, be it RE or non RE. She just has privity with this technology platform. Therefore, for this purpose, the TSP will become the data fiduciary. It has to, by default, become the data fiduciary. It's using the data of the user, any SMS, location history, phone book access, to then navigate her to third party products and services, which she may or may not take. So at this instant, at this stage, the landing page, the technology service provider or the platform very much is the data fiduciary. It's only after this, when the user then goes on to become a PPI holder or a borrower, that the more interesting and nuanced questions start, where the data that's been collected about the user at the platform journey then either goes to the RE or is used by the RE for the purposes of selling their products and services. So at the first instance, whether you're an LSP, a loan service provider, whether you're an outsourced service provider, technology service provider, whatever hat you wear, um, you will become the DF by default because that's the landing page and that's the data that you're using in the super app context to then determine the purpose and means for which this data is used and then act as an orchestrator navigating the user to various different products and services. I'll pause here.
Stage when there's no specific RE in the mix, it's more straightforward. It's just a tech platform which is engaging with the user. But I think the complexity is when you click and when you're specifically, then directing the user to an RE. And let's say the RE asks the TSP to share all historical data about the borrower, about the user, then to be able to underwrite them better. Would all of that historical data then take the color of lending data under the outsourced agreement between the RE and the TSP? In which case, then would it be fair to say that the entity, the TSP actually loses its independent rights over how it can use and process the data? And I think I'd also maybe want to nudge us to the direction of eventually what does this mean on a contract? A bank may want to push and say that lending service provider, you're a data processor in all circumstances. Whenever you're processing data on our behalf, when you're providing us services, you're a data processor. Would that functionally then mean that the TSP loses the ability to actually say that no, there is a certain subset of data which has nothing to do with and how would we characterize that in the agreement for the TSP to be able to do that? So like scenarios that we might see in agreements and what we're seeing now in the market.
Okay. So let's take two different scenarios. Scenario number one, Prajita has landed on the super app, agreed to their T's and C's and privacy policy. She has navigated the app, generated some data about herself while using the app, opened the app 10 times, gave her name, phone number, gave her access to location services, etc. All of this historical data, which is either generated while using the app or given access to the technology service provider, in scenario number one, the TSP drags this data along and gives it to the RE offering Aparajita a loan, right? And shares it with the RE. Of course, consent-based sharing will have to happen. This is a separate entity. But it very much shares it with the RE and says, this is the historical data that I collected. Here it is. And now you can offer her a loan product depending on the analytics layer based on this historical data. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, this super app has 10 NBFCs within its umbrella. It collects all of this historical data about Aparajita, does not share all of this data with any of the NBFCs, but it tells the NBFCs that I will act like an orchestrator. I will signal the right user to the right NBFC depending on the underwriting criteria that the NBFC has given me. Supposing NBFC 1 says, I only want users with in these pin codes. I don't want users in these blacklisted pin codes. Another NBFC says, I have these XYZ underwriting criteria. Uh, TSP will then just direct the users, depending on their analytics, to these NBFCs to, of course, take the final decision on whether or not these users should then become customers of the RE, borrower of the RE, right? But doesn't share this data in scenario number two with the NBFC, only orchestrates. Okay. In scenario number one, um, even if the sharing of data between TSP and RE is consent based, I think it is important contractually to define user data as the superset and customer data as a subset of that superset. User data is what Aparajita gave the TSP on landing per their terms and conditions and privacy policy. All of that historical data, which before the user had a relationship with the RE, before she became a customer, she consented to, all notice provisions were followed and gave that to the TSP. Merely because that is shared with the RE, it should not make the right of the TSP inferior merely because of the sharing, right? And it should continue to be governed by the T's and C's and privacy policies. So the way I would handle it in the contract with the RE, if I was the TSP or the outsourced service provider, is any data that is collected about the user after she has entered into a loan agreement with you or terms and conditions and privacy policy with you is governed obviously by the RBI regulations, by applicable law, digital lending guidelines, and by your terms and conditions and privacy policy. Any data that is gathered, that is collected before this second line of contract that the user enters with you and becomes a customer of the RE is governed by my terms and conditions and privacy policy and by applicable law to me, which will be the DPDP, because RBI guidelines haven't kicked in as yet. I would leave it at this. The dragged along historical data, when it overlaps with the say loan transaction history, or say repayment history, which is clearly lending data and governed by the RBI guidelines, that overlapping data, I would imagine that it would be smarter to, if not leave it silent, but leave it to simply say that that is governed by RBI guidelines, but user data, the superset, is governed by my T's and C's and privacy policy. That, to my mind, would be enough to give me rights over data that is not lending data, repayment data, but is data collected before that.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking through how a bank might respond to this. If there are and I don't think we're seeing these clear definitions yet of user data, lending data in agreements. I think there may be two paths that from a bank's perspective. One is that they simply say that you're processing data of the user only on our behalf and at our instructions, and don't have independent rights over that data. Or just the first part, that you're processing it on our behalf when you provide services to us, and kind of leave it at that. I just wonder if from the tech partner's perspective, it's better to just have this framing where you're saying, in providing the services, we may be processing data on your behalf, but we stay silent on the rest of the data. Just to avoid, from a bank's perspective, if in case there is a breach, they may want to guard themselves against further exposure, by saying that if they had allowed specifically the TSP to process data on its own behalf by taking consent or any other means of the user. And I see a question that Gaurav had on seeing banks opting this definition of a joint data fiduciary. I think this is something we're also seeing, used around a lot as to whether you can be a joint fiduciary. As such, under the law does recognize the concept of joint fiduciary, because it says with others determines the purpose and means. There is a recognition of the idea that the purpose and means would be jointly determined by one or two fiduciaries, but there is nothing more set out in the law. In GDPR and other regimes, joint data controller really means that both of you are jointly undertaking some joint, common, shared purpose and are using the data for that joint purpose, and you're jointly then liable to the individual. I think in India, what we'll see more often used, and what might be the more appropriate framing in a lot of these contexts, may be the concept of an independent data fiduciary. I am an independent data fiduciary because I want to be able to use the data for my purposes. Bank is an independent data fiduciary where it's using the data for servicing the loan and underwriting and all of these things. Not necessarily a joint framing where one then is responsible in some way to the user for the other's actions. So I think that because we got a couple of questions on that as well, on when all in the RETSP construct may we see examples of joint data fiduciary. I'm not sure if that's the right framing at all times. But yeah, just maybe on the first question is that I posed to you on whether there could be this idea of whether we stay silent in the agreement, basically.
I don't think that staying silent entirely on this construct is useful. You do need, so whenever one speaks to financial tech entrepreneurs, it's always there's always a um, goal to own the user at an account level. To own the user at an account level, where you say that I own Aprajita and today I can cross sell to her one loan from one NBFC, another PPI from another a bank, and various different financial products and services. The ability to do that is dependent on your use of Aprajita's data to then provide her these suite of services. Right? For that, you need to be able to be a data fiduciary, even in a very narrow use case where you say, I am only going to be a co-branding partner to a PPI issuer, nothing else. My platform is, I provide an app, I'm the co-branding partner. I have a PPI issuer in a relationship with the bank who's issuing the PPI at the back end. I have a co-branding agreement, and that's all I do. That's all my app does. Even in that instance, where the PPI issuer, the bank or to do whatever you want with the data. It recognizes you as a data processor, but it gives you free reign to process the data, use the data, do analytics on the data, provide the user various different services in relation to the PPI by processing her data. It gives you wide power. Even if you muscle that kind of a clause into a DF-DP agreement, between RE and co-branding partner, what will happen is, at the moment your relationship with that RE ends, for any reason the bank pulls the plug and says, I no longer want to have you as my co-branding partner, you have to very quickly pivot and get another regulated entity to become the PPI issuer. You have to obviously execute fresh terms and conditions with the user. You have to do all of that. But the moment the bank, the first PPI issuer pulls the plug on you, all of your rights in relation to the PPI holder, in relation to Aprajita's data, will cease immediately. So you will not be able to then provide her PPI services from another PPI issuer, because you'll have no data about her. All of that. Whether it's PPI related data, like her transaction data, which of course the bank owns, or it's even her name, phone number, any personally identifiable data that you collected. You did it at the behest of the data fiduciary, which in this case was the PPI issuer. The moment you agree to a DF-DP relationship purely, Your rights are entirely contingent upon that contracting counterparty. That contracting counterparty pulls the plug. You cannot get another RE and then use that data, because you have no independent right on that data, to then continue the relationship with another RE. So no, I don't think you should remain silent. I do think that the contractual phrasing of user data being a superset and customer data being a subset, where you say that user data is governed by my T's and C, customer data is governed by your T's and C, and by applicable law, which is of course RBI regulations. That kind of distinction is important in terms of negotiating strategy with the bank. The banks are usually in a position where they're always hierarchically sitting on top of outsourced service providers, co-branding partners, LSPs, whatever way and shape those outsourced service providers take. They always sit hierarchically on top, right? In this case, I think it is important to communicate to the bank that, look, you don't want to be liable for the user data that I collect as a DF. I'm collecting that. I'm responsible under the law for that. If there is a fine tomorrow because of a breach, etc., it's me who's responsible. So I have rights over that data as a DF, but I also have the corresponding liability. And I think
Mm.
because often regulated entities understand the liability construct very well, I would go down the liability route to say, for user data, carve it out, give me the right as a DF.
Fair. And I like how you put it. I think it's also, why would the bank want more liability for what the platform is doing on its own, right? So that's a good way to also land the message and have at least some kind of delineation in the agreement itself. So just on the question, if we were to go back to those list of questions, I think on our LSPs processors for a tech platform, how would you classify your role? It depends. If you own the customer, if you want to acquire the customer, if you want to be able to use their data for multiple other business lines, product lines, you are a data fiduciary. You're determining the purpose and means there. But it is something then you'd have to carefully construct, both in terms of the UI flow where you are displaying the privacy notice, getting the user's consent, and in your agreement with the multiple REs that you're working with. There may also be different kinds of LSPs that actually don't want to own the customer at the account level and are actually purely just processing data and are, TSPs for a lender. Those are different in those scenarios because you're entirely doing everything at the behest of the RE, in which case you'll be a pure play kind of data processor. Similar questions, I think, on when data is collected by an app on behalf of the bank. So if from the get-go there is a bank at the back end and it is the one which is directing the platform, you're simply an app provider and you're doing whatever you're doing at the behest of the bank, then you're more likely, you're a processor, you're not really using the data for your own purposes. But consent validation is the responsibility of the DF at the end of the day. The DF may delegate this task to a DP, but it will not discharge it from the liability under the law. If there is something amiss in the consent mechanism, regulator, individual will all go after the DF, and DF will not be able to simply hold a defense saying we delegated this task entirely to the DP. So I think DFs will have to be more heavily involved in how that consent architecture looks like. I think another similar question on how do we classify our role, but I think what I'd like to pick up on here is the question says, for a tech platform with minimal personal data touchpoints, how do we get classified? I think it wouldn't matter whether it's minimal or a very extensive data set. The question really is, are you controlling the data? Are you directing the processing? The moment you're doing that, even if it's just two minimal data points, you will be the data fiduciary for those two data points. You may, of course, be able to ring fence that and say for everything else, we're simply a processor.
Yeah.
So
SS,
yeah.
actually, I have a question before we move on.
Yeah.
So Aprajita lands on TSP's app, agrees to TSMC's privacy policy. TSP is, of course, a data fiduciary. She then goes ahead and takes a loan from an NBFC hosted within the app. TSP shares data about Aprajita, the historical data about Aprajita, drags it along, shares it with this NBFC for the NBFC to underwrite Aprajita and offer her a loan. So there is overlapping data sets. Say her historical data is her mobile phone resources, etc., location history, SMS history, etc. That in the capacity of being an LSP, now it wears the hat of an LSP, shares with the RE RE offers Aparajita a loan. Okay. For this overlapping data set, TSP derives its right as a DF on that data set because it's entered into T's and C's and privacy policy with Aparajita. And it's also told the RE contractually that that data set is governed by my T's and C's and privacy policy. And I'm a DF for that, or is governed by applicable law. Now, for this overlapping data set, there's a breach. Who's liable?
Yeah. So I think in these circumstances, whoever the breach is attributable to, because the TSP, the platform is also wearing two hats here, where all of the historical data it had directly collected from the user and has been processing it and is the data fiduciary for those. But wherever the breach is traceable back to, whoever is actually responsible for it, they are the entities that are liable. But I actually still wonder if banks will be because of the RE TSP hierarchy, and because REs have to ensure that TSPs and LSPs only have limited data available, only basic minimal data about a borrower. Again, I think the question will still remain as to how much of this historical data would completely take the color of lending data, which means the TSP loses the right to actually be effectively able to use it independently and have that. So that would be the first point to think through in case of, and if that is permitted, maybe some TSPs and tech platforms may end up taking the view that no, we'll not share this historical data at all with the RE. It is only some insights that we may be able to share with the RE, but not that raw data. That would mean that all of this data we kind of lose control over, because another applicable law requires us to process that data, or allows the RE to limit our access and control over that data. But in any DF-DP scenario, actually independent kind of DF scenarios where both entities are data fiduciaries and there is a breach, the individual could go after either, but then the one that is it's then up to each of the organizations to defend that the breach actually didn't occur at our networks or our systems through access logs and our incident logs and all of that. So it would be evident from a security perspective where the breach actually occurred if it is independent data fiduciaries that are actually processing the same data set for different purposes.
Understood. So the individual can go after both, and
Yeah.
it's for the respective data fiduciaries to prove uh, who was the party in breach.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we also have a question on when a fintech uses third-party fraud detection tools, who's responsible for that compliance? Fintech, vendor, or both? What minimum safeguards should you have? I think the data fiduciary is responsible under the law. So if it is a fintech which engaged a third party tool, it will be the fintech that is responsible for it, or the platform which is actually controlling and directing and processing the user's data. And if you're integrating a third party tool, then it will be up to you to conduct some kind of risk assessment, due diligence of that third party before onboarding them, before integrating that API, making sure that you're kind of above board that third party. So we often get queries on what should be part of our risk assessment questionnaire. I think a couple of themes that we typically advise are around questions around what are the minimum security safeguards and practices that you have. The rules now lay out a list of 6-7 minimum safeguards, at around access logs, around encryption, etc., which at the very least we should make sure that any third party that we're integrating with has. Questions around, have you suffered a breach, and if so, what were the remedial measures taken in the instance of that breach, and so on, and so that you're at least sure as to what the third parties credibilities are around data security. I want to move to the other question around credit risk assessment services and joint data fiduciary. Then I think the concept of joint data fiduciary is when you're jointly processing something together. If there is a shared goal, a shared purpose, and your processing of the data is limited to that shared purpose, the moment that there is any individual purpose that you might have outside of that shared goal, I think those are independent data fiduciary relationships, not exactly joint. And the difference in liability would be joint means that both of you are jointly liable to the individual. They could come after either, and you would have to make them good, regardless of where the breach was took place, and then it would be inter se the arrangement between the parties that determines how the payout would happen. But where you're independent data fiduciary, one is kind of saying, I'm not responsible for what you're doing, you're not responsible for what I'm doing. We may have overlapping data that we have collected because we both have certain uses around that, but that doesn't mean that we're kind of accountable to the individual together. So while we see a lot of these, we see a lot of discussions around could RETSP actually, is joint data fiduciary the right framing? But I think with joint comes its own set of challenges where you're both jointly accountable to the users. So you may actually prefer to insulate if the situation so demands. We also had a question, again, this is also an interesting one about payment service providers and PAs, payment aggregators. Now, well, strictly speaking, PAs are they're B2B enterprises. They don't really have privity with individual payers. It's I'm on a merchant's platform and I want to make a payment. A PA is at the back end. They're not necessarily front facing. They don't have privity as such with the individual user. But how would you place them under the law? Because the data protection law really only has these two criteria, fiduciary and processor calling the shots with respect to that data or processing on someone's behalf. When it comes to payment data, it's the payment service providers are not strictly speaking, processing it on the merchant's behalf. Of course, in some sense, they're conducting the payment on the merchant's behalf, but they are the ones determining what data, how it's processed, what all checks do we run. We may be using the data for settlement, reconciliation, a bunch of things, fraud prevention, other retaining transaction records, a whole bunch of purposes there which are not strictly related to the merchant. And the regulatory requirement is such, actually the regulator imposes these obligations on them on independently processing and collecting data. So I do think that they are actually they function as data fiduciaries, but that brings the interesting question of what do we see them doing in practice? Would this mean that we're going to see very detailed notices and consent? Will payment aggregators have to fundamentally alter the way that they're interacting with users? So that's just something. Aprajita, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I think principally I'm aligned with you that a payment aggregator is not simply acting at the behest of the merchant. Its entire business model, in fact, depends on processing that payment data, storing that payment data, running analytics on top of that payment data, reconciliation, settlement, fraud detection, chargeback detection, processing a refund, even doing analytics on top of that data to maybe cross-sell something to the merchant, even if it's not the payer, but to the beneficiary. All of that depends on having access to data in a way that allows the payment aggregator to use it in for various different use cases. It's not merely to process the transaction for the merchant and then delete that data or lose all rights on top of that data. Right. So in that classical definition, I do think that they become data fiduciary. They aren't data processors on behalf of the merchant merely. It would be very difficult to structure it in that sense. But a payment aggregator is fundamentally, like you said, it's a B2B business. They don't have privity with the payer. They have privity with the payee or the merchant. Where they don't have privity with the payer, any data, all of this data about the payer is personally identifiable data, right? Aprajita paid Zomato 20 rupees. But since there is no privity of contract between, there is no terms and conditions privacy policy executed between the PA and the payment aggregator and the payee. Uh, in most instances, it would be challenging for the entire PA business model to then start executing these terms and conditions, give notice, take consent. So we'd have to go down some other way in which to process the data of the payer, which does not entail notice, consent between PA and the payer or the individual in this sense. Which would mean that as a PA, you'll have to write powered by XYZ PA and then say that the user voluntarily provided this data to me to process the payment. And therefore, I have right over this data as opposed to doing the notice and the consent, which would add certainly a layer of friction between for each transaction. But it is also fundamentally not the business model of the PA. Some PAs execute terms and conditions and privacy policies with the payer or with the individual, but not all PAs. And even though some PAs do it for a specific purpose, to offer some kind of a feature to the payer, but it is not the default for a PA to take have any kind of privity with the person paying. In fact, the payment may just be a white label solution, whether it's just like a URL hop. So in that sense, I do think that the entire PA industry, while it's a DF, while I think it would be very hard to argue that it's a DP, and they may not even want to argue that they're a DP because they lose all rights on top of that data unless they derive it from their merchant onboarding agreements. And merchants are, of course, offboarded. Those relationships are fickle. But they do want to retain rights over the data for for various different reasons, for literally for business continuity. I think then they'll then have to go down some other route. Wonder SS if you have a view on this one.
Yeah. I think aligned with you that they are, it would be a mischaracterization to say that they are simply processing on behalf of merchants because there is a lot that they're kind of independently using. In fact, that page of the information that is entered, merchants don't really even have visibility over that. So really the idea is that regulatorily they are, constructed as data fiduciaries. They are the ones calling the shots with respect to that data as to what they're doing it for, when the purposes for which they're processing the data and so on. I wonder, so I think you talked about the legitimate use for voluntary provision of data. I do see some merit in going down that path because it says when a individual voluntarily provides her data for a specified purpose. So in this instance, in that page, it should be apparent to the user means that the data is being used for payment processing, and there is always often a clear statement saying powered by so and so, the PA. So it's evident that the data is in that context being used to process payments. So perhaps that's the path to go down
Can I actually
under,
probe
because
you
there
on
is no other.
Can I
Yeah.
actually probe you on that one, SS? So when a Prajita is paying 20 rupees to Zomato and it says powered by XYZ payment aggregator, and we have to go down the voluntary provision of data um, uh, route because notice and consent can't be taken by the PA. How much can we stretch that voluntary provision of data elbow room, right? I have voluntarily provided my data to the payment aggregator to process my payment to Zomato, but I haven't provided, there is no voluntary provision of data to that payment aggregator to do a whole host of analytics on top of that data for various different reasons. Maybe to cross sell the merchant something else, maybe to use for fraud, for analytics, to build another suite of services that the PA can provide its merchants. It isn't merely to process that data for the transaction. It is for a whole host of analytics done beyond that transaction. So, can voluntary provision of data include within its ambit um, processing beyond uh, transaction fulfillment?
Mm. No, I don't think that would be feasible, or actually that would be defensible under that provision, because it talks about there being a specified purpose. It would not be reasonable for the individual to know that their data is being used for these myriad other purposes. If there is a regulatory requirement and because of that you're processing some data, again, while there is no clear legitimate use for that, I think you'd be on firmer footing Even so, generally, and I think we have another example on credit bureaus, which we'll also talk about. But I think if it's a regulatory requirement for which you're processing, you may still be able to. You may still have some strong grounds to argue that you need to be doing this. But if it's something completely different, like safeguard for future checkouts, or even us being able to use this data for distinct purposes, I'm not sure if that will work. So if there is a URL hop and you're going to the PA's URL, then I expect to see more detailed either notices, T's and C's, something that comes up, pops up there for the user. If it's on the merchant's page only, powered by so and so, I think then actually if they want to be able to use the data for myriad other purposes, I don't think there is a I think notice and consent would then be the most natural way. I see that Swapna has a comment there on perhaps PA's role, extent of data collection can be set by the regulator. Getting individual payers to agree to the data usage each time may not be feasible for a payment transaction, which is fair. Like it's for a particular purpose. It's kind of the business of the PA is structured such. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just thinking in the absence of any other regulatory clarification, because even if there were a clarification, we have to find some basis within the law to be able to do that. There is no catch-all basis for performance of a law, performance of a contract, or legitimate interest. So I think we'll have to place this within one of the existing bases that we currently have. Okay, I am mindful of the time, and maybe we can go to the next theme, and which is related to a little bit of what we were speaking about, just on this kind of sectoral versus DPDP interplay. So if the data protection law says something and RBI says something slightly or completely different, then what do you do? So let's say the RBI, I mean, it is fact that the RBI sets out an exception to consent in many instances. There are instances where consent is not really the recognized or required by the RBI. Yeah, Sam, the slide with the questions. CICs can pull credit information from financial institutions without users' consent. The SISRA Act governs this. So how do we really reconcile this with the notice and construct framework? Aprajita, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. Um, so I think it is fairly safe to say that where a regulator, say the RBI, goes above the baseline of consent, that consent does not cure a a digital lending app collecting Aprajita's mobile phone resources after onboarding. So you can't perpetually have access to Aprajita's mobile phone, her location history, etc. Um, After onboarding, you can't take it during, in perpetuity just because she once took a loan from you. And that's over the baseline of the DPDP. It's a higher standard than what the DPDP sets out. And that's easier to reconcile with the DPDP because it is in addition to what is already required by the DPDP. Okay. But um, a CIC, on the other hand, the credit information companies will require information about Aprajita to be reported irrespective of Prajita's consent or even knowledge. So if I apply it for a loan to HDFC Bank, HDFC Bank can go to a credit information company and pull my credit report under the CIC Act uh, without asking for my consent to pull that data, right? And the reason that the law has been framed in such a sense for hard pull, which is that the entity itself goes and asks the credit information company to provide the credit report about Aprajita, is that if Aprajita is going and applying for loans to 20 different companies, to 20 different lenders, that credit hunger, even that gets reported to this to the CIC, right? And it isn't as opposed to a soft pull where Prajita consents and says, hey, can you pull my credit information? I'd like to share it with XYZ entity, or I'd like to see it myself. A hard pull doesn't require anything like that. There is no consent requirement. So in a sense, it is actually below the baseline, or it does not it is incongruous to the consent standard under the DPDP, which will have to it'll have to fall under some other provision of the DPDP, because consent simply is um, it simply doesn't fit in for this particular use case and for this particular act of parliament, right? And I think the only use case that can you can get slotted under is that there is a legal right to this data. Otherwise, the entire construct of credit information companies providing credit reports um, to to these entities, it would not be recognized under the DPDP. There would be a conflict between the DPDP and these other acts.
Yeah. So I think there are two provisions in the DPDP which I want to talk about a little bit. One is the provision which says that this act is in addition to and not in derogation of other laws. In the same vein, of course, it says in case of inconsistency, this will prevail over the others, but all laws say that. So the idea seems to be that where there are sectoral laws, those should also be given equal importance, because this act is in addition to and not in derogation of other laws. And I think in the context of specific data sets and specific institutions, if there is a more specific sectoral law, and the RBI, even in the most recent master directions, while consolidating the directions around credit bureaus, has clarified that consent is not required, because the whole idea is that credit institutions must be able to share data with credit bureaus without the user's consent. And there is a more defined framework there around access and rectification and all of those things. So I think that specific law would prevail over the DPDP's baseline requirement. So but I know at the same time the most elegant solution would be if there is a specific basis under the DPDP that we could place this under. Like you were mentioning, I think the one which says that there is an exception which says if you are processing data to further in pursuance of a legal right or a legal claim. So we do wonder what the contours of that would be. To what extent can you say there is with the law which is the basis, but if we're doing something because under another law we have the right to actually collect all this information, could some of this be characterized as having a right to that information? So I think similarly, another use case that we often get queries on are around KYC and other regulatory requirements. If there is a regulation that requires you, like RBI says, conduct KYC, this is the kind of data that you're collecting, this is how to go about it. What would that mean given the notice and consent construct? And I think there's some complexity, because the again, strictly speaking, it should not be notice and consent, because there is a law that is dictating and saying collect data for this purpose, and the statute is determining the purpose. But of course, in a KYC instance, it is possible to give users notice, and often when REs are conducting KYC and collecting a plethora of information about individuals, they have the opportunity to provide a notice, and that may not strictly be limited to what is required for KYC. There may be other things that they're doing with the data for which they'll provide a notice and get the user's consent. But even if it is characterized as consent, I think one condition for consent is that it should be capable of being withdrawn. In this case, it will not be capable of being withdrawn, the right to process and continue to retain KYC data, because PMLA and other laws require reporting entities to retain KYC and transaction records for a certain number of years. So I think we'll rely on both of those things. Pragmatically, it'll end up being that you do give a notice to the individual that this is what we're collecting the data for. This is a regulatory requirement. This is all data which is outside of that regulatory requirement as well, and then get their consent for that. But at the same time, they would not be able to withdraw consent if it is something that is required to be retained under some other law. I think whenever we speak of DPDP and RBI conflict, we are often also getting questions around the local storage requirements. And very briefly, I think the DPDP doesn't really say much yet around cross-border data, and says we'll put countries in a blacklist. And I think the rules added two additional provisions to that. One was that significant data fiduciaries may be asked to store certain categories of data within India, and those categories will be determined by a government committee that is set up for this purpose. This may be to have some kind of sectoral coordination on what types of data and what entities are required to localize data. And the other requirement in the rules is that there may be some transfer restrictions that the government comes out with. I think we'll have to read both together at this time. And the law also, data law also recognizes that if there's a stricter standard in the RBI norms, for example, with payment data or with lending data that you must store in India, that will anyway, prevail over the general requirements in the data law. There was another interesting question around breach reporting, and I think someone asked that in the chat as well once again, which is that let's say there's a fintech, and the processor has a mandatory 6-hour reporting window to certain doesn't differentiate between processors and fiduciaries and just has a 6-hour reporting requirement for all organizations. But under the data law, and even RBI requires the REs to submit that report, and REs to kind of notify, and similarly data law requires the fiduciaries to notify. So if the fintech reports to CERT directly, to because they have that mandate for 6 hours, would that mean that they've effectively admitted a breach on behalf of the bank before the bank has actually had a chance to assess the situation? Wondering, Aprajita, if you have a view on this one.
No, actually, I don't have a view SS. This one is a tricky one because you have two overlapping kind of provisions of law. Yeah, I think that it is. I think your primary regulator, right? If you are regulated, if you're an RBI regulated entity, that's the first port of call in terms of breach reporting. So you need to alert your regulated entity partner for sure, and they will then, of course, take their own call on how to report, etc. But you also don't want to be in a position in which you've reported to one regulator and not to the other. Curious actually if you have a view on this one.
Yeah. So I think this one's interesting because it's not just about two regulators, it's also about the fintech being required to. In the other laws, it's the DF or the RE which is required to report. I think practically how this will play out is the tech partner or the fintech will first report to the bank, and the bank then assesses the situation. The law does say on becoming aware. Similarly, even CERT directions talk about on designating as a breach. So I think there is some window there often on identifying when something has become a breach. So I think, I mean, of course, there is a bit of a conflict because CERT doesn't really care if you're fiduciary processor, but most contracts would require the processor to first report to the fiduciary, or the fintech to first report to the bank before going ahead and reporting independently to the
Yeah.
regulators.
No, but I think that will become tricky, right? Because often the fintech might be a data fiduciary in their own right as well. Now they've reported to the bank. The bank may take a call um, according to their kind of internal processes, etc. Now you're sitting on a bit of a runway, right? The clock has started because it is a breach. Say that you've identified it as a breach. Um, as a data fiduciary, first you do have a responsibility to report it onwards, right? And whether or not you have the bank's buy-in. Can't really hear you, Srinidhi.
Yeah, I think I also lost you there for a moment. Can you hear?
I can, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I actually missed parts of what you said.
Yeah, so I think that just the position that you've put a fintech in, quite practically, they may be a data fiduciary in their own right. Breach has occurred. It's an acknowledged breach, right? It's not a potential breach. Um, in the You report to the bank. You're trying to work it out with their legal counsel, for instance, as well. But at the same time, your obligation to report has also started in your right as an independent data fiduciary too. So if you don't have the bank's buy-in in terms of reporting, etc., it puts you in kind of a no man's land, right? Because you're acting as an outsourced service provider to the bank, but you're also an independent data fiduciary. You also
Yeah,
have liability to report in and of yourself.
correct. Yeah, I think this has been one of our favorite points of discussions in like workshops that we've done on just how would you really practically work out? Would it be an open line of communication between the fintech here, which is the tech service provider, and the bank? Also depends on really what is your bigger play. Is it your B2C, B2B business? But yeah, I think often what we think of is if you decide to report, you report to everybody and kind of keep them in the loop. Of course, in the data law, it is a little more complex because the moment you designate something as a breach, you report to the board, to the individual as well, so that and there is no risk threshold for reporting to an individual. So it's kind of a report to everyone or report to none sort of a situation that you find yourself. So I'm mindful of the fact that we're almost at time, and I do want to take one question that we often get around consent and cross-selling. And really I think the question that's come to us also is, can we take consent in one go for a wide range of processing activities? Let's say for instance, there's an e-commerce platform, and you have different group entities which have different services, from payment product, financial services, um, um, various different health and whatnot. So kind of a super app sort of a framework. But could you have a scenario where you simply have a long elaborate consent notice for all of these services together and tell the individual, hey, we have an itemized description of all of the data that you're going to be processing, give us consent for all in one go. So it's that catch all consent and bundling together of various purposes. Aprajita, do you have a view on that one?
Yes, very quickly. I know we're almost at time right now. Um, so I think where the line is drawn between a kitchen sink consent in which you have 10 different group companies, 100 different use cases, 100 different data points, all bundled into one consent. Let's caricature this, right? Like an absolute kitchen sink consent, which is opt out, which is just something shoved into the privacy policy and terms and conditions. That's at one extreme. The other extreme is every single data point requires another consent and another notice and another consent and another consent, and you can only use it for that defined purpose. Somewhere in this broad spectrum, each company, each data fiduciary will have to take the call on where in this spectrum do they believe they can comfortably lie and say that we have taken meaningful consent from the individual and we have given meaningful notice to the individual, right? In both these extremes, we'll see, I think in the initial days of the law, we'll see incorrect calls being taken. We'll see extremely conservative calls being taken. We'll see extremely cute interpretations being taken. And slowly, I think the law will evolve in this, in the India context, where it will get taken to court, where DPA, etc., will opine on where that line is. But I think to your example, can you take a kitchen sink consent with all the data points, all the use cases in one consent? I think no. If that was the intention of the law, there was no need for the law because that's what the law is trying to guard against. That kind of, I can, in the fine print, write whatever I want and use your data for whichever purpose, however, whenever. That whatever, whenever, however form of privacy policy and terms and conditions I think that age has gone now with India becoming DPDP compliant.
Yeah, I think the act still does say consent has to be specific, so that supports what you're saying. There was though a deliberate change in the from the draft rules to the final rules. The draft had said itemized description of data, and specific a specified purpose in the singular, and an itemized description of the services and uses. From that, it's changed to you still have to do an itemized description of data, but there is a recognition that it could be purpose or purposes. So I do think some level of putting together is all right, and I think that's the middle ground that you were speaking of. That there may be some core purposes and close to core incidental kind of purposes that are okay. That there is no expectation to granularly unbundle each, because then routine business operations would not take place, if that were the interpretation. But at the same time, if it's a completely distinct, unrelated purpose for a third entity, which may not be very apparent to the user either, that may not necessarily be justifiable under this. With that, perhaps I think we should close today's conversation. We're 5 minutes past time. Thank you everyone for joining in, also for sending in your questions to us, and your participation in the chat today as well. We'll hope we'll do keep an eye out. We'll keep putting out more content around specifically fintech and data as well. And I think over the next couple of weeks, also a few other sessions geared towards different industries. But thanks, Aprajita. Thank you once again to everyone who joined in. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.